I was talking to the panel, and we're going to try and make this as interesting as we can. Appreciate the opportunity. So the panel is really going to be talking about, the digital economy and AI. We're not going to talk about introductions here because I'm told that on your apps you will have all the speakers' details. So we'll dive straight into the meat of things. Probably just coming straight out of, let's say, the ground and setting the context. Your Excellency, I think what I'd really like you to do is probably give us a bit of a perspective on how we're defining the digital economy. The flashy words, but I was talking to a lot of people before this event, and everyone has a different definition. Yes. So before the panel starts talking in 4 different directions, hopefully you can give us some context.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you that you're all joining us. We have heard a lot of sessions during these 2 days, and what we can definitely say that all these different sectors of economy need digital transformation. So actually, even if we are one of the last panels, we are in all the previous panels because transformation there will only happen with digital transformation. And so digital economy is not just e-commerce or things we might think of, but it's several layers. Of course, we need the infrastructure. That's clear. We need a good infrastructure in all the countries around the world for people to be able to participate to a digital economy. Second, what we need is digital services. So it is a transformation of the services business, which has happened in the last years, or is continuously happening. That is a key factor, in my view, for a digital economy. Third is, of course, e-government. A government play an important role, and they should be at the forefront and should be the players at the front, and Saudi is a really good example for this. So if you have come here, it has been pointed out already, and you have a visa, you have a digital visa now, it's really easy to deal with. So that is another important part. And then the one I mentioned already is trade. So remote forms of trading are an important factor. But all these 4 do mean nothing if you don't have digital literacy. I would even call it AI literacy. And let me go back to the year 1774. When the Austrian Empress, Maria Theresia, and by the way, she is on the silver coins that will be used in the MENA region, especially also in Saudi. It's her picture on these silver coins that have been accepted for trading and for paying. She introduced compulsory reading and writing in the year 1774 to Austria. And today what we need is this digital literacy. In AI, in all the other factors, to include everybody and to help everybody to gain it, women in Africa to be able to participate to a digital economy, open up their own businesses, start their own businesses, have a bank account. So it means a lifetime change for people all around the world, irrespective of which education you have. So we need to take care of the next generation, and I would say this is the most important about the digital economy.
Well, that's a fascinating way to, I'd say, deconstruct and make things simple. So thank you for those details. I think, if I may just jump from there while we're on the topic of definition, right? We've heard so much about AI, and it's a fancy word. I think, George and then Patrick as well, if both of you could give a bit of your perspective on AI, very often used word, but probably, again, very misunderstood. So, over to you.
Okay, so I'll start it a bit. So obviously, AI, from my perspective, AI is something that we don't want to become a general tool, right? It's something that is executable, that especially in the last 4 or 5 months, things changed quite a bit. Lots of people call it AI 2.0, where you once the ChatGPT has launched their ChatGPT 4 or 5 months ago. And that creates a large model. So one of the reasons that I think AI it was a buzzword of 2018, 2019. Everybody knows that this is where the trend's gonna go. But how do you get AI to be adopted by all the enterprise, all the governments, is really something to be practical and executable and cheap for these enterprises. So I think the large model changed everything. And this is a very disruptive time where you can create model much faster. And because a large model, multi-language, multi-model type of approach. So things gonna be, then you develop application on top of the large model. Allows enterprises to apply different vertical industries, like healthcare, like education, like smart cities in the kingdom.
Sure.
Where that's where the direction is going. So for me, AI should be a very integral part of digital economy.
Interesting.
And also has to make it cheaper for allow small medium enterprises to use AI and create application. And it's easier to create application, not just bunch of scientists back in the research center to create algorithm all the time. That's too expensive because you don't have too much of these kind of talent around the world.
Yeah.
So I think where the times right now, and it's where things has arrived.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Patrick, how about you? Perspectives on AI?
So, first of all, AI is not a tool. AI essentially, I think, is going to add a lot to human knowledge. Essentially, I think is an engine for reasoning. And we all are very familiar with internet, for example. But internet facilitates us with a speedy and organized access to information. And with AI and with AGI, essentially it's going to create additional knowledge. So I am an investor, and I believe wealth is from knowledge. And the delta of transaction, essentially the value you can generate from making an investment has a lot to do with the delta of knowledge. So I think we're incredibly excited about the opportunities that comes with AI. And certainly there are a lot of risks associated with it. But I think, we're human beings, so we're always have been dealing with very complex issues as we go. So it's all about risk and reward. I think the risk is really large. I think the risk needs to be discussed and debated. But the point here is, and we are actually on the verge of a true innovation cycle. And innovation comes as a surprise. Most of innovations are fake. They're arbitrage. And the true innovation comes in a way is like we're just overwhelmed at the beginning, but then we're just trying to figure out. And use kind of a human history a little bit kind of to guide us, because most of us, very difficult for us to think about how future is going to unfold. We think about our past experiences, with industrial revolution, and for our ancestors in front of that revolution. And if people heard about how that's going to happen, internet and everything, how much that's going to reorganize our life, most of people, I think, got kind of freaking out in front of that. But the truth is, we all kind of benefited a lot from the development of it. So nobody will have a crystal clear picture of what's going to happen with AI, because what AI is really about is when you have the right framework, large language model, transformer network, the methodology, and then you apply a lot of data coming through, then what you have is called emergent properties. Emergent properties come as a surprise. So that's what we're going to deal with. So I think, everybody on the panel has been experienced dealing with the digital evolution of the past. So this is our common opportunity and responsibility.
Interesting. And I'm Catching on to a few words, which I think we're going to cover as we move ahead. You know, I heard all of you talking about benefits and risks. Some of you talk about risks, and we'll probably cover that a little later. Tony, coming from your perspective, you know, you're at the forefront of an organization that itself is enabling a lot of transformation, a lot of change on the digital side. What are your perspectives on looking at AI as an emerging technology and on how digital economies are being built? And especially leveraging your own global experience of looking at this across different parts of the world, right from, you know, the Asia Pacific all the way to Europe and beyond.
Well, I think like other panelists already mentioned about the either digital economy or either AI, I think, and of course mentioned about the like risks, also about the inclusivity and also about that to attract interest. So I think from our experience, for any kind of a new generation of technologies, when it starts, normally there are some people welcome, some people make a lot of hesitation. But from the industry perspective, we always welcome pro-innovation approach. So when we talk with the decision makers or the policy makers, regulations, we're always saying that maybe in the beginning, try to have a industry-friendly policy. This will encourage the industry players from the manufacturer, from vendors, from ecosystems, even from, you know, all aspects, you can get the interest. So this will be the point number one. Of course, also we need to bear in mind that the risks, because any new stuff, especially now when we talk about AI, even when 5G starts, people are talking a lot about the risks. So we think that this is the subject we have to take into consideration. So from all the discussions which we had in the past, not just about AI, but for all many other new technologies, we think that we should understand this is a multi-role governance. It's not to manage the risk or to mitigate the risk, cannot be just one body responsibility. We should have the government, we should have the policymakers, regulators. You have to build your rules. But meanwhile, also we have to understand industry players, like the vendors, software developers. Of course, you need to obey the rules, but also you need to build your governance. And meanwhile, the users, the public, also they need to be educated, they need to understand. So point number two is how this multi-role governance should be introduced and involved generation by generation to mitigate the risk. This, I think, is very necessary in order to really embrace the new technology. And one more thing also I think is very important. Madam mentioned about digital economy or even AI. The digital infrastructure is a foundation. I think that's definitely no doubt. Otherwise, either how you generate the data, how you analyze the data, how you transmit the data, without a good infrastructure, digital infrastructure, this cannot be done. That's how it's happening in China also, that's how it's happening in Kingdom. I think the government trying to encourage the industries to build the good and qualified digital infrastructure. By all means, regulations, even some incentives. I think European Union also doing the same, to give the incentives to encourage the industry to build the better infrastructure. So I think put all this together, and last thing definitely is important, it's about education. Education. So if we have all these pillars together, I think we can say we can embrace the digital economy or new technologies.
Interesting. And Tony, I'm hearing a bit of an echo of what Your Excellency you mentioned. I'm going to circle back to you from a hook that I'm taking from Tony on on policies and regulations, right? I think we've talked about digital economies and AI now, and we hear layers of infrastructure and services, and we're talking about linking into trade and literacy, and I think obviously government has some level of role to play in it. In your experience, having been on the side of governance itself, what do you think are maybe key takeaways from a policies and regulation standpoint?
Well, first, I think I'm not the first to say that AI is most probably the worst thing, and at the same time, the best thing that is happening to us.
Okay.
And it will change really everything. We just don't believe it now, and it will change the way we learn, healthcare sector. We heard all this. And it's happening at a much higher speed. So of course, you need to take care. You need to look what is happening. You need to regulate. You need to find out what you want as a society and what you don't want as a society. I think it's in all our interest for a safe and for a better life to use all the opportunities in it, but at the same time to put some regulation to it. And now the regulation, we have to be careful. So coming from a continent which is highly regulated, I think the most important thing is to regulate, but as much as is needed and not too much, because not to destroy innovation.
Okay.
Because you can do as a regulator. You can just disrupt it in a way that it's stopping and people are trying to go around it. So this is different to anything else we have seen so far. People talking about this singularity point a lot. Yeah? When will it happen that AI is more intelligent than a human being, and will they ever take over? There is a lot of fear in this discussion. To take out the fear, you have to regulate and to set standards, but you should not overdo it. And in Europe, sometimes there is a tendency to overdo it, so I know what I'm speaking about, and I've always stood up for a way that it leaves innovative people, scientists, companies, air to breathe and to continue with their innovation. Because as you said rightly, it happens by surprise. It's not something that you can plan, you can set up budgets and so on, but when does it really happen? And I also agree what you have said, a lot is fake, a lot has already been there, it's just something looking different to what has been there. And in all this basket, there is something which will really be the innovative thing, and we all don't know about it. Neither the companies, nor the politicians, maybe the scientists to some extent, but some also not. In basic research, they would tell you, well, we're just researching for the fun of it, and that's good. Yeah? So do it, but in a way that it does not kill innovation.
Interesting. So I think the message maybe for the audience, collating a bit of what everyone just said, is that we're seeing digital economies evolving, right? Technology is evolving. And I think it's important to let innovation flourish. So regulation is about maybe giving a boundary or a construct around it, but letting the industry kind of evolve on their own and innovate. That's interesting. You know, looking at this, I guess, you know, another thought comes to my mind is about then what are the prerequisites for, you know, letting the digital economy evolve? Not just AI, but if we talk about the broader platform of the digital economy, you know, and what are the prerequisites out there? Maybe, Georgia, I can bring that back to you now because I heard you talk about it, but I'd like everyone else to just talk a bit about that as well. Because here in the audience, I think we've got people, individuals, companies who are looking at understanding how this can be brought into the, you know, into the region. So I guess knowledge of prerequisites is really a good barometer to have ready.
Yeah, I think some of the panelists already talked about those, some of the prerequisites. I think our friend Tony talked about infrastructure. I think you have to have 5G, you have to have IoT connectivity. Those things got to connect the people with all the machines, right? Yeah, that's a basic you have to have. Then you got to have AI infrastructure, which is a computing power. And also, obviously, the other factor you got to have is edge computing, edge device, smart devices. If you got to, I think that's a must you have. Then you have data, because you know you got to have a quality data to connect all the people with and process the data. Then the last thing I think is very important prerequisite for me, from my experience travel around the world, is people. you have to have a skilled people, and to have that, to create these applications, to create that innovation environment, very important. And then the bottom is obviously with the government support from the public sector and also the government sector to form alliance to create those digital economy. I think I've been in the kingdom, traveled 3-4 years now, since time has a JV with PRF. So I think I know this is a much look at the region, but I think use Saudi as a example. They have all that infrastructure and all that prerequisite ready in the kingdom to execute that digital economy. And then more importantly, they have that urgency as well. Okay. It's fantastic,
So in addition to that, maybe just a very specific question that comes to my mind, and maybe Patrick, you could talk about it. At least in most of the conventional, let's say, or in most other industries, right, funding plays a critical role. In fact, today, I think earlier in the day, we had a session on that as well, right? And funding doesn't necessarily only mean funding for large CapEx projects. How have you seen the evolution of funding to deal with the digital world, with the digital economies? Is it adequate? What is your experience around that? Or what are the messages for, again, the audience here?
When we talk about funding, essentially we're talking about money. Money is a pretty big pool. And so today we're talking about the Fed raised interest rates and capital got dried up. It's a relative thing. It's just a level of water going up or going down. It's still a larger pool of water, right? So every investor still needs to go out there and figure out the returns, risk adjusted. That's essentially what investors are supposed to do. So I think money is actually there. It's just becoming less for the near term. And but as people started to sort of make sense of all these different kind of risks, in the past, people thought about if you're a technologist, you're an entrepreneur, you only think about your relevant domain and what's going on with your competition. Now you all of a sudden realize that Fed raising rates has a lot of big impact on your business. Geopolitics makes a lot of big impact on your business. So investors are, for the first time for this generation, scrambling to figure out how to price in the risk. And then people realize, what? My job is to generate returns. So essentially, I think when people underwrite the deals, I think people are just getting tighter and with type of deals they are going to invest. For quite a long time, when we have something like pretty hot, like AI, for example, if AI, this thing happened 5 years ago, there will be just so much money going to that. And as long as you have a good resume. But today, having a good resume doesn't really get you a investment from a credible investor. So that's the situation we're looking at. So people are trying to price in the risk. But also, I think people needed to understand that for a lot of things, we go through cycles, capital markets, even COVID, right? It's a healthcare thing. It has gone through cycles. So, but I think AI as a sort of a new way of adding productivity for everything we do, I still think that curve is very, very steep. And about three years ago, we invested in a company. It's actually a cancer diagnostic business based in America. It's called Grail. And this company is a global leading player in AI. And in cancer diagnostics. But the way we think about it, we believe this is actually AI and in disguise of healthcare. They have conducted the single largest clinical trial in human history. With a large amount of data, they're refining their methodology. And all of a sudden, they have emergent properties. It's a sort of a similar path of ChatGPT, but in the vertical. And so having the vertical data is very, very important. But you have to let the data run through a really good process That's where you come up with really good results. And so I think we're just going to, we are going to, I believe, live longer. And I think AI will, in the end, create a lot of wealth. But on the journey getting there, there are just a lot of risks we needed to figure out how to deal with. I think that's it.
Interesting. And, you know, hearing, and I think that kind of gives us a bigger picture of all the different prerequisites. Tony, I'd like to jump back to you on maybe a broader question, yeah? One of the functions, or one of the objectives of this panel is to talk about, you know, collaboration between China and, you know, the Arab nations. And obviously, I think there are a lot of best practices to look at from China, given that, you know, we're looking at China being one of the top 3 largest economies when it comes to going digital and investing in AI, right, globally. Could you give us a bit of a perspective on what kind of best practices we could have coming in from China?
Me?
Yeah, well, you or perspectives from the others on that?
Okay, all right. Because to prepare this panel, I asked my colleagues made some research about some numbers.
Sure.
Maybe first I can share. So from the source from MIIT, from China Ministry of Information and Technology, last year, 2022, the digital economy already contributes 45 trillion RMB and equals to 40% of the GDP. So digital economy already became one of the most important, or maybe the most important economic drivers for China. Then when we look about how this happens, I think for Chinese government, since quite many years ago, you know, every 5 years there is a 5 years planning, and digital has been put in a very high priority. So start from the regulations, as I mentioned in the beginning, very pro-innovation approach, the regulations. That's why there are so many innovations, so many companies has been really grow so fast in the past decade. Point number 2, also the government, central government, give a lot of very attractive, friendly policy, even financial incentives to encourage the industries to really build, I have to say, maybe the best ICT infrastructure in the past 10 years. I still remember back to 2012, I was in Europe. At that time, being China just started 3G, but Europe already, we're talking about the 4G. As it today, China has the biggest 5G network, much, much bigger than anywhere else. This is about digital infrastructure. If I'm not wrong, I think China already has about 10 million base stations. We're talking about 100 billion IoT connectivities as it today. So, and also for data center, because George mentioned about computing power. China built really 8 national-wide data centers in order to support the computing, which is essential also for data analyzing and data processing. So with these 2 approaches, I think give China have the capability to start from lag behind, now lead in this domain. So I think another thing, if I'm not wrong, when I was in university, I started computing science technology. As it today, there are more than 200 universities, Chinese universities, they have AI and computing and science technology subject. This contributes, give a lot of support in ICT talents and also AI talents. However, still a huge shortage. The report says in China still we have about 5 million talents still in a shortage, which this is also, I think, refers to kingdom or Middle East countries. This is also a challenge when we're talking about AI, especially AI. Mm-hmm. So I think those could be something which we can share, and also we can learn from China, from the regulations, pro-innovation, and from the encourage the industry to really build the ICT infrastructure from connectivity, but also computing power, and meanwhile the education.
Interesting. And Your Excellency, do you want to maybe talk a bit about that? we're talking about an emerging bunch of economies here. Are there any learnings that you want to highlight? I think Tony, although I may have caught him by surprise with that question, but he addressed it quite well. He's highlighted skills development, incentives, government support. Anything else you want to maybe highlight as learnings for the Arab nations?
Yeah, I think what is important is we have mentioned that training in these areas and building up capabilities is key, because if you don't have the brightest people in it, you will not be successful. If you have the brightest people, you will be successful. That's a key factor. And that's happening. So I see this here, and I see this in all the countries which are successful in this area. Another one is, of course, make it not just the topic of the large, big international companies. At the moment, we have a lot of big players in the market, from China, from US, and not so much from Europe in the B2C, more in the B2B area. So this seems to be the place where Europe is positioning itself. But don't forget about the SME, because SME makes up a huge number of the economic GDP in most of the countries. In Austria alone, it's 98.8% of GDP is generated by small companies. And you need those to change the rules of the game. And you need them in the digital economy as well as in traditional businesses. And this is very important. To make this, help those companies, give them the room in regulatory sandboxes to develop and then to grow rapidly. Because all the digital companies we see now, mainly the international ones, they have once started as a small idea as an SME in a garage or somewhere. So we need to keep this and not only concentrate on the large international, but also the smaller ones. And this is the role of a regulator, to make sure that they can also thrive. But also wanted to mention something about when we're talking about this digital transformation, maybe we'll talk about it later also, is this sustainability topic. So in my view, there is no sustainability and no solution of all the big challenges of this mankind, be it in water, in air pollution and so on, without digital and without AI. Okay. So this is the key to opening the box where all these problems are in and to solve them. And this is, AI will help us tremendously in this. Figure out why the water is polluted, how do we do with CO2, or also pandemic situations as we had with COVID. BioNTech could only invent a vaccine that quickly because they have been using digital and AI solutions over years. Yeah. And I think in each of the cases it is needed.
Interesting. And I think you've very intuitively jumped to, I think, a key part I wanted to also bring up from this panel. I think the audience should benefit by listening to the benefits that AI can bring, and more so what we're seeing in real life, implementations, right? George, of course, you mentioned briefly about a tie-up here with BIF and bringing models to applications. Could you talk a bit about what we're seeing as benefits and applications?
Yeah. So in Chinese there's a saying that 落地, so means that if you have a AI, how do you get that project executed and realize the project? Right, so real practical applications. So we've been lucky in the kingdom. We have some good partners like PIF and other clients in the kingdom. So smart city is one of them. It's something that you could obviously, besides doing using CCTV connected to data analytics, besides surveillance and security, but there's a lot of things you can add on to smart services like smart parking, smart building, connects everything to use the AI platform that can connect to all the IoTs, saving energies, those projects. They are real projects that in the kingdom through different cities. They are executing those type of projects. You know, pollution, looking at the waste management, on the road detection, detecting the roads, which roads are bad. Then they analyze the data, then and forecast, and send out the maintenance people to fix the roads. Education sector too, use AI to train the teachers in the kingdom. Last year we did a project with Mohiba, which is an organization for gifted students, and where they compete at a global level for Olympics. So many of these type of projects are already underway in the kingdom, and in the rest of the region as well, right? For even, like I said earlier, I think the biggest thing that I like to do, and Sunstein wants to do with the partners, ecosystem partners, is how do you get the cost of developing these AI applications lower, and so the small enterprises could be using those AI applications, not depending on the really expensive AI scientist. So that's where the large model, all that stuff. One of the projects we're talking about now, working on, is pizza store. How do you count the pizza and make sure the quality of the pizza, hygiene of the kitchen is good? Those are very long tail problem, what we're calling AI. It's a very, it's a problem nobody wants to solve, because to solve it costs a lot of money. But how do you get in? So those are the projects we're doing. Realistic project, practical, can bring benefits to many people people's life, a regular people's life. That's very important.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. And I think I again heard a few panelists talk about, of course, all of this centering around data, right? Tony, coming to you again on question, because this is something I've heard a lot from people all the time. What is the sanctity of our data? How about data protection? How about cybersecurity? I think even Saudi's strategy that has come out on artificial intelligence and on data covers that to some extent. Could you share a bit about how resilient that part of the value chain is?
Well, I think Madam also mentioned about from the intention perspective. Of course, we want to have the development, but also we want to be safe and secured. However, when you're talking about regulation, when you're talking about policy, it's very necessary to take this balance, not over-regulated. Imagine that always I have been constantly sharing one story like one case about traffic law. Imagine that if in the beginning we say for the car, you cannot overspeed 20 kilometers per hour, I think the car industry will not happen, right? So this is the first thing I think we have to manage the intention. Intention is to keep balance, and also the intention is to keep necessity and the scope. So when we talk about in realities, which we're always saying to have, let's say, the principle for these regulations, like common approach, common standards, and to have the shared responsibility. It's not just a one body responsibility. Madam also mentioned about non-exclusivity. Inclusivity, actually, it may help. And to build the standards, that's how the whole ecosystems, from the policymakers, industries, even the associations, vendors, all the participants should contribute to make the policies be neutral, inclusive, but also standard-based. I think this will be generation by generation. This will make the whole industry more healthy. Development, but more healthy. Instead of just, sometimes it's too harsh, saying that, okay, I cannot do this, you cannot do that, make it very narrow. I think this will not be the right approach. Which I think, another point also, I think for, especially now for the industries, it's for the companies, it's also very important to build self-governance, security and data privacy and security, cybersecurity governance model, which is also very essential for our industry. Yeah.
Interesting. So basically, the message is we're seeing benefits. We're seeing a lot already being done in place to kind of make sure things stay secure. So there's a lot of assurances already flowing in. I know we're almost on top of the hour. What I would want to do is, each of you brought in a lot of individual expertise onto this panel, and I'd just really appreciate if I can have, let's say a closing statement or a final takeaway, for the benefit of the audience. Patrick, can we start with you?
Yes, I think the title for the conference is China Arab Business Conference. Essentially, what would be the best form of collaboration between China, for example, and Arab countries? And by the way, to take a step back, when we think about the world, people tend to see it as a two-dimensional map. So they see Austria is a country, USA is a country, Saudi is a country, and China is a country, and flat. But I see the world as a three-dimensional world. In a way, there is something called nestedness or clusters of strengths. And when you look at that way, then you realize, for example, a lot of software innovations are coming out of the US. And a lot of sort of manufacturing, for example, the expertise are coming out of China. So that's why today you see Chinese companies are incredibly competitive in many areas, such as renewables, electric vehicles, and robotics, and things, and so on and so forth. So I think for the Arab countries, it's very, very important to build a very diverse economies. So bring the best from different parts of the world and trying to come and collaborate. I think certainly, my friends sitting on this panel, they represent companies with their own strengths. So and back to the large language model, it's still the same thing. You have to have a lot of data, a lot of very diverse data running through your system. That's how you actually have something really, really interesting. So I think the beauty about the Chinese economy and the US economy for a while is just large. There are just so many kind of economic activities, very sophisticated. They're like in collision every day. And that's where it's the fertile ground for innovations. And so I think it's very, very important and for Arab countries to build a very diverse base, robust economies to start with. Then all of a sudden you have talents, and talents want to be here because with very robust exchanges, you come up with really, really interesting innovations. Not arbitrage, innovations are surprise.
Thank you on that. I appreciate it. Tony, just going in the same sequence, maybe any key takeaways that you want to summarize briefly?
I think just one sentence. Let's keep since we are talking about innovation, we are talking about digital, we are talking about AI. So just one sentence. Let's keep the openness, keep always with the passion, and let's welcome this evolution. No matter you like it, you don't like it, I think it will come. So let's keep the open and keep the passion to welcome it.
That's very positive. Thank you so much for that. Over to you.
Okay, so I think we talked about the digital economy. I will stay on that topic on digital economy. Yeah. I think the digital economy, we talked about prerequisite, all that. So I think in most of the nations in the Arabic region it's all there. The prerequisite is getting there. So I think then we talked about AI. I think AI, the one thing I think I want to just remind all the audience and everybody is I think the time's here now, because with the large model, everything, the people is able to develop those algorithm model much faster, time to market, and cheaper as well. So I think the adaptation of applications using AI is now. So I think we just gotta work all together to use AI in the right way and enhance the life better for the humanity.
Sure, and I think that's music to your ears for everyone when you know that you're talking about an opportunity which is at the right time, right? It's good. And back to you, Your Excellency, for final words.
Yes, I think I can only confirm what you have all said. It's the most exciting time, most probably, you can live in. Often you don't know, when you're living in such a time, you do not know that this was the starting point of something very different and can be very good for all mankind. And very concretely, I've met so many business people in Saudi. I've met many politicians and decision makers in the government areas, but I want to draw the attention to the business people in Saudi with a lot of passion and a lot of eagerness to change their business models. And I think this is now time to execute. Will everything work in the first run? No. Will we know exactly what in each case is going to be successful? No, but we have to do it now, and it's now time to execute and use all the opportunities and the knowledge which is here and in the world to change the business models to be even more successful and, as we say, productive.
Excellent.